Through my appearance here today, I hope that police officers in the future will not experience the same frustration and anxiety that I was subjected to for the past 5 years at the hands of my superiors because of my attempt to report corruption. I was made to feel that I had burdened them with an unwanted task. The problem is that the atmosphere does not yet exist in which an honest police officer can act without fear of ridicule or reprisal from fellow officers. Police corruption cannot exist unless it is at least tolerated at higher levels in the department. Therefore, the most important result that can come from these hearings is a conviction by police officers that the department will change. In order to ensure this, an independent, permanent, investigative body dealing with police corruption like this commission is essential.
7:32 right now, and all eyes on City Hall to see who will be appointed to head the Civilian Complaint Review Board, the agency which handles complaints against the NYPD. So interim chair Arva Rice resigned last Monday after a tumultuous relationship with the mayor's office and the NYPD. Mayor Adams did ask her to step down in April, so her last day is August 15th.
The resignation is raising eyebrows because the number of misconduct complaints filed with the CCRB against the NYPD jumped more than 50% last year. Joining us this morning to discuss the future of the CCRB is the former chair, Reverend Fred Davey. Good morning to you, Reverend. Thanks for taking the time to be with us this morning.
Good morning. I'm glad to be with you. Thanks for your interest in the subject.
So Arva Rice's resignation wasn't a big surprise to a lot of folks. The mayor asked her to step down in April amid tension over the handling of the Kawasaki Trawick case. So do you think that was the deciding factor in her departure?
Look, it's the job of every chair of a city agency, particularly this one, to advocate strongly for the agency in terms of resources that it needs, in terms of its relationship with City Hall, City Council, and especially the NYPD. It's also the job of any good chair to ensure that the NYPD is not slow-walking cases such as it happened in the Kawasaki Trawick case, so that the cases aren't thrown out because of statute of limitations. That's what Arva Rice did. That's the job any chair is supposed to do. That's the job that I did. So I think it's incumbent upon City Hall, on the City Council, and the NYPD to recognize the role of the chair and to work with the chair and the rest of the commission in order to ensure that there's effective civilian oversight of the NYPD, which is the mandate and the mission of the CCRB.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm Jim Vrettos, your host. America has been building an infrastructure for a police state for decades. Under the authoritarian rule of Trump, that infrastructure is rapidly escalating. It can be turned on anyone and builds on itself. ICE is now the highest funded law enforcement agency in the country and gets more funding than the entire federal prison system. In New York City, from 2011 to 2019, there were on average around 750 arrests every day. These cases, the arrests, and the stories within them were almost always sealed from public view. The simple truth was and is that most policing happens in the dark. Attempts to hold it accountable to the public rarely, if any, succeeds. What happens when you try to hold the police accountable? This is the topic of a terrific new book entitled Cop, Breaking the Fixed System of American Policing. It's written by Muir, Supervising Investigator of New York City's Civilian Complaint Review Board, and Greg Finch, a senior investigator at the CCRB. Mac was also the executive director of Community Police Review Agency in Oakland. There simply is no other book out there that better prepares us all for the rapidly growing police state we're all facing. It illuminates the culture crisis that shapes American policing, shows why most reforms have been doomed to failure, and frames 6 proposals for reimagining policing, concrete steps to create a criminal justice system deserving of the word justice. And we're thrilled to welcome Muir to the Radical Imagination for the first time. Welcome, Mac.
Jim, thanks so much for having me.
Thank
Appreciate
you. And you're just flown in from
California, yeah.
to visit us and to be here.
Well, it's a wonderful opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And of course, we met at the authors' night out in East Hampton, and I picked up and read your book page by page. It is absolutely fascinating. And as a criminologist and someone who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice for over 25 years, this is a must-read book. It really is. This is no laughing matter here. I've never read a book like this. So tell me how you got into this work and the difficulty of this production, of this capacity that you have to get to the story that simply nobody else has been able to do.
So it is a unique story, and there are different ways to come to the conclusions that we've come to, but also the perspective's never been told from the people who actually investigate police misconduct as civilians. My journey, I grew up in Oakland, California, a place renowned for criminal policing, and there was a case about 20 years ago where officers were beating folks up and planting drugs on them. The sergeant who ran that unit remains on the FBI's most wanted list.
Really?
And so growing up, there was just an understanding police are best to be avoided, and that's the end of the conversation in many ways. And there were conversations about systemic inequities, racism that occurs, but it was taken for granted, I think, in Oakland in particular. Growing up out of that.
The influence of the Panthers as well at that time?
Absolutely. So I was actually the paper boy for the Black Panther newspaper.
The paper boy?
Yeah, very random sequence of events. But I think really was able to delve with those folks into the aftermath of what happened with the Panthers, because it had a profound impact on the city of Oakland, and also understand the community harm that occurred. Right, it's still an unresolved issue in Oakland that Panthers killed cops and cops killed Panthers, and we didn't do a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There remains this sort of silence over the city about that, even though it's known globally for the Panthers.
And how many decades ago was that?
That was the 70s.
Right. So that has been festering.
Absolutely, and it remains palpable in the community and in the police department. What it means to be a black officer in Oakland is really interesting, given that history. What it means to be a police officer generally is interesting, and also you're in a place where the core of the more progressive black community was exercised in many ways.
But isn't a movie, Fruitvale Station?
Fruitvale Station, yeah.
That's set in Oakland as well?
It is. Oscar Grant was killed by a BART police officer, which is the equivalent of a subway cop here in New York. And we worked with Uncle Bobby, who's Oscar Grant's uncle, throughout the time that I was working in Oakland, on reforms not just to the Oakland Police Department, but to the BART Police Department. And we speak to this in the book. Engagement with the victims and the family members of victims is key to have any meaningful reform, because when I've talked to oversight practitioners around the country, we come and go.
Yeah.
And the honest reality is we can afford to, right? You can do this work for 10, 15 years, and you can say, okay, I'm gonna have a career pivot. You have emotional attachment to the work you've done. The victims and their families can never afford to let it go.
There's a tremendous dropout rate, isn't there, among people in the work?
It's high pressure work. It's
very
challenging,
very frustrating.
And at the CCRB here in New York, you have folks who are coming generally out of college or a few years out of college, put into really complicated, challenging situations that are very high stress for very low pay. And so, of course, you see high turnover. But even on the national level, for the directors of oversight agencies around the country, relatively high turnover rate as well. It's hard to do this job consistently, and it's a thankless, really, from top to bottom in many ways. But we speak to looking from the investigator position, and that's really what this is. It's a snapshot in time. What is it like to investigate police misconduct? You're handed a case file and say, hold a cop accountable. how do you do it? What are the things in the way?
Let's start at the beginning here for our audience.
Yeah.
Who now? Okay, after you were the paper boy here. Okay,
Yeah.
And you graduated. What was your reason to join?
So I used to work for then Governor and now Senator John Hickenlooper in Colorado. So I worked in Denver, and he actually started the police oversight entity in Denver. So I was aware of that dynamic, and they investigate both police misconduct and sheriff's misconduct.
How'd you end up in Denver?
Just a mere coincidence through a connection. So I just thought, out of college I'm going to be doing this, would work in politics. I thought I was going to work in politics moving forward. I had the strange opportunity in college to spend time with Mike Dukakis, who, in an aimless time in life, he had been like, what your goal should be is to be mayor of Oakland, and I'm going to help you along with that. He told me, he's like, hey, you're sitting in my office, I'm going to give you this sort of toolkit. So I wanted to work in politics. And so I ended up, and Mike Dukakis, amazing guy, just great life advice for like stability in stressful professional situations, as he knows better than most. And ended up working for Governor Hickenlooper and becoming close with actually the head of corrections for the state, Rick Ramish.
So now we want to get back to, now, but because it's so much to cover here. But Dukakis, of course, we'll get into his famous phrase that, the Willie Horton, and if somebody raped his wife and so on. So that's also part of the morality you're dealing with here, about visions of crime. But let's talk about that as we move on.
Absolutely, and just to speed through, I ended up becoming close with Rick Ramish, who actually worked very hard to nearly end solitary confinement in Colorado. And he ultimately, as I was looking for a future in politics, recommended I come out to New York and try to work on closing Rikers Island, put me in touch with various folks here. And then the job I came for actually didn't get funded by the city council. And so I'm here, I've got a vision for having an impact, and I'm in New York City. Might as well poke around, and as what happens with most people who end up working at the CCRB, a friend of a friend reaches out and says, hey, well, there's this weird city agency, they investigate police misconduct, and you get paid less than $40K, and it's long hours, and it's totally thankless.
Sounds great.
Yeah, if you want to do it for a second, they're constantly hiring because people are quitting so often. And I actually met with an investigator, and she was like, don't do it. This is just not, I've been doing this for years, it's not going to be rewarding. And then I was like, well, I should get a job. And
what made you stick in there?
Well, and that was the beauty of it. Greg and I met, we were in the same training class. And so Greg started for totally separate reasons than I did. But I think that as you start to get into this world, you're like, whoa, this is a one-of-one environment here. We're young people investigating police misconduct with access to these New York stories that are just beautiful and tragic, and a skill set in investigations that's really unique. The way civilian oversight investigations work, with the focus on being non-biased and focused on being really precise in the way that you ask your questions, the way that you listen.
How was your training? You have a chapter on that. I mean, you say these very complex, sophisticated interactions going on here. So you're thrown, I don't know, a kid at what, 25 or something, and here you're thrown this case. How were you trained to deal with this?
So I think perhaps as the case with police officers, you got the real training, the official training, which is going to be you're going into a classroom and somebody's reading from a PowerPoint and you're talking about case law and so on and so forth. But the story at the CCRB, and really it projects your success as an investigator, is who you get to know early on and who your heroes become in that environment. Because there are real heroes working in any sector of public service, but at this agency you've got folks who have committed to the work for a long time, and the precision and the fortitude that it takes. I was really lucky that I was surrounded by folks who gave me an imagination not of just of what it would be to get really good at this work, but how to love it. And you have to love story, you have to love policy problem solving, even though you may not have any say in what happens. You gotta love it, you gotta spitball like you're talking about the game. Oh, maybe they'll change this, maybe they'll change that. And
I'm just curious, from just a little personal family background, did you get that from, where'd you get that from?
Yeah, so my family was New York journalism family. actually.
New York what?
Journalism family.
Journalism, I see.
Yeah, so my grandfather was editor of Newsweek magazine.
Sure,
And
Long Island.
yeah, and
Bill Moyers also.
yeah, he's editor there, and then he started Atlas magazine, which was the foreign policy magazine during during the Vietnam War and up through about 1973. It's another story that Nixon had a real problem with him, so that went out of business. And then great grandfather was involved in Newsweek, Business Week. So having that storytelling. And I remember my dad, we were walking in New York visiting family when I was younger, and I never met my grandfather, but we were in a big crowd, and he was telling me that his dad, as a reporter, would just say, stop and just watch the crowd, and you can see the story. The crowd has a separate story. So right, that's built into the infrastructure for how you see things.
Very important.
Absolutely, and then in these individual moments, and I think a real reason Greg and I connected with his film background was, we were seeing these just really tragic, beautiful arcs, really funny stuff. I mean, it's as well. I mean, you got all these different layers. You've got the humor of police officers. You got the humor of people in stressful situations, and oftentimes the funniest people are the saddest ones. So this is going to be hand in hand. And then you have this is the New York story. It's the American policing story, and real lessons to be drawn from that. And as that builds up over time, I convince myself, and Greg convinces, and other folks convinced that this is an environment where it's worth staying. And then it's like, all right, let's get really good at this. And then at a certain point, it for us internally at the CCRB, it's like, well, nobody pays attention to this. De Blasio's talking about police reform. It's nothing to do with what we're dealing with day to day here. You hear people nationally. It's nothing to do with the work of sitting in front of a police officer and saying, what happened? Tell me. With a victim of police misconduct, what happened? Tell me.
You never see that world. No, you're seeing.
And it reveals something so far from the public discourse.
Yeah, why? And why do we do that? Why don't we have you on? Why don't we hear this? Well, you're right. It's all sensationalized. It's titillation and.
Well, there's the sensational part of it. There's where you're going to boil down. It's the reason you got defund the police or Blue Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter. It's way simpler to put it in a catchphrase. But also, right, the victims of police misconduct are generally really poor folks who are not used to being heard, are not empowered to be heard, and live in the isolated communities where police misconduct is sort of normalized, right?
So they're vulnerable.
They're vulnerable. They're not having their voices elevated all that much.
And the police, like you say over and over in the book, they're expected to do something, but they're not actually sure what they're supposed to do, nor are we sure what we're telling them to do. Well, so they got to do something, right?
Definitely, and you see that at the same time, one of the reasons we don't hear genuine answers of why did you do that from police officers in the public discourse, right? They've got attorneys, they've got to keep their pensions, whatever. But so we have these beautiful, insightful moments of people, I think, more honestly grappling with the rationale for actions they took, more honestly grappling with a sequence of events. And police officers are also in their own isolated communities. Right. They are spoken for in the media by the police union, by the chief of police. And when you're actually investigating police misconduct, you see that those people are not speaking for the cop on the street, right? It's like the Chamber of Commerce speaking for a specific business person or the teller at a bank. It's so far away. So
you do have empathy for the situation that the police are in. I think that should be.
Oh, absolutely. But the funny thing is, it's really hard to be a cop, not for the reasons that I think you commonly see. And it's sensationalized, and you can have a hero story of what it is to be a police officer, and that's not going to be the average cop's experience, right? There are some people who get famous for cracking a big case or whatever. Usually it's just you're faced with a lot of depressing conditions, and how do you build a life that's meaningful out of that, and how do you feel like you're contributing to society out of that, and how do you reconcile with your own actions as a police officer that sometimes do really tangible harm that's looking you in the face.
Wears you down to see that time and the tragedy, the misery, and that's been created by larger forces.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's not much you can do about it. But you don't have to go around also and harass and humiliate and shame. But on the other hand, you've got to have your data, statistics.
Yeah, you got the quotas.
Quotas. You do have a quota.
you got the quotas.
We're not supposed to say that, but
Well, here's the thing.
But
Quota is a floor, right? So a
Right.
quota says you got to hit 10 arrests, 5 summonses, or whatever it is.
a month.
A month.
Whatever it may be.
But there's no ceiling. So really what we examine is the likelihood that in the NYPD and other data-driven police systems, it's not just that the risk of being punished for too little is there, right? Everybody kind of understands that. But the benefit of doing way more is endless. There's no ceiling on you can't do too much policing as an officer. So what happens if your too much policing looks like a bad stop, an unconstitutional stop, an arrest that doesn't get prosecuted because the DA's office is like, what is this? Where you can in those arrests have serious public health consequences, people losing their jobs,
Yeah.
people losing their income. We're in a country where, 50% of people can't afford $500 of expenses in an emergency, and an arrest is an emergency.
Yeah.
And you got to deal with legal fees, so you get your public defender, you got the issues that come with that, you got the criminal record that follows, the degrading income that comes from having a criminal record. These are serious outcomes, and for the officer on the street, you understand to some extent that there will be negative outcomes from your actions. Some of them are going to be required in your job, and you just have to sit there and figure out how to wrestle with it. We got a real insight into what that looks like, and drew some, I think, really meaningful conclusions from that.
You do, but as you point out in the book, you pay a certain price for that too, in
Yeah.
terms of actual, rates of family abuse, that alcoholism, addiction,
Mm-hmm.
that even lower rates of life expectancy.
Yeah, and it's
And
understudied.
to be
It's
yeah.
really understudied. There's this study from the 90s regarding 40% of officer households experiencing some form of domestic violence or other
Amazing.
similar.
Yeah.
And you haven't had the access to continue those studies. You've got life expectancy studies that show a serious gap in the life expectancy between the average police officer and the general population. Not enough study into that. You see culturally in the NYPD, there is a sort of a horror with your retirement age. There are officers who will hold out to this age, turning 63, and you'll go. We reference, I believe, a case in there of a fella in the department who killed himself right before his retirement party.
Yeah, a month before.
Yeah, and he's a
Wow.
higher up in the department. But when the way policing is designed is that once you join the police department and you're there for long enough, that's your family. And so even retiring is sort of losing your family and the culture you know so well. So we look at that and also really refer back to Arthur Niederhofer. I'll shout him out, the former NYPD lieutenant who went on to go to law school and get his PhD. Researched extensively, surveyed extensively with officers.
And so did John Jay for many years.
Yes. And he broke it down to 4 stages of a police officer's career. And it's bleak, but his words is that you really start out with a generally optimistic take on being a police officer, and then you hit degrees of cynicism the longer you're surrounded by the police culture, where you have sort of faux cynicism, where you're playing along with the culture, you got the gallows humor, etc., and that becomes something that's increasingly real, and then over time you resign yourself to just sort of the emptiness of the system you're in, where you aren't seeing the positive consequences of your work.
Yeah.
And we also draw a through line between that experience and that of somebody investigating police misconduct. Right? If I'm doing this work, I'm still getting the cases. They're coming. Hey, police misconduct could go way down. Same is true for crime.
It goes in that black hole.
And and then you just go, oh shit, here's another one. It happened again. And it's funny because it's such a different, not funny, but it's funny in the dark sense of it.
Sure.
When you see one of these bad incidents, as somebody who's seen so many others and understands that for every George Floyd, there's a bunch of other videos that just never got out there or didn't have the right camera angle.
Exactly.
And so you see it and you go,
and that was sort of chance that even got shown.
yeah, I mean,
Right.
I was just marveling at like the fact that somebody held the camera at that angle for that
Right.
long.
Otherwise,
Changed the course of America, right? Like, isn't that wild? And there are other situations where we're just like, it's disputed. We didn't have surveillance camera, or they went behind something. But this is happening like clockwork, and it's the fear in many communities, and particularly Black and brown communities, that this could happen to them, permeates the system. Mm-hmm. And then on top of the fear that you might be killed by a police officer, You have just the daily stops, frisks, intrusions that don't happen anywhere else, at least anywhere the same
Hundreds
frequency.
and hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, millions in U.S. in New York City.
New York City,
Yeah.
exactly, any given year. Especially among the narcotics agents as well.
Yeah.
But within 5 years, I've noticed too, and I've had officers in my class explain too, that it is so difficult to not become corrupt. I mean, it takes about 3 or 4 or 5 years in that environment to somehow remain outside of the temptation there.
Yeah, and I think that's a department to department issue. I think
Yeah.
that in America, one of the challenges is the NYPD is not a transparent police department, despite what they might say. It's a department with, as we point out, pretty limited accountability measures outside of the political will of the police commissioner. I am pretty optimistic that when you have an understanding, let's say as a narcotics officer, although we are advocating for
And then
end to the war on drugs,
Prohibition.
which is still
Exactly.
going on, and felt we needed to take the time to do. I think that I'm sorry. I
No,
digress.
go ahead.
No, I think that I lost track for just a second. For the narcotics officers, I skipped ahead into the book into that section.
To be so much involved in the corrupt underworld of that.
So, and I'll
Serpico.
get back to that. The other
Yeah.
thought I was having. No, that in some environments, if let's say you're a narcotics officer in Chicago right now, Chicago has a really meaningful accountability system. They have a inspector general. They've got a federal monitor. You can't get away with exactly the same stuff that you could potentially get away with in New York. And as we're seeing with Adams in this era, like accountability is not top of mind for this city government.
Really?
Yeah, right. And so you can change the incentives. And I can say this because as the director of oversight in Oakland, we were working very close with the department. I was aware of all the most serious cases in the department. I was aware of the various allegations and the issues they're dealing with and the coordination you have to do with other law enforcement agencies and so on. Officers behave differently when they know that not just that they're being watched, but that the person next to them is. The peer pressure dynamic is different. So I think that although we are sort of in the heart of darkness of the oversight system in the book itself, we are pretty optimistic about the things you can change, and they're really tangible, and a lot of the time they're sitting there right in front of you.
Right, we'll get to those 6 proposals. But we got to spend some time on this fascinating chapter you did on the historical experiences that many of the cops who eventually became cops, and the Irish historical events. What formed that? What was so crucial in Ireland and among the people that came here, so many of them going into the police force and carrying on in a way some of the traumas and interactions that they were experiencing did experience back in Ireland? As you point out, it doesn't make any difference if you're, Joe Rizzo or Joe Polini or one of my students actually, Joe Goldberg. You point out they're all sort of Irish cops. So what the heck does that mean?
So we start with a theory in sociology of first effective settlement, and this has been written in a few different forums, really about America itself. The idea that the first, we'll call it non-native peoples,
Contact.
who take the land and build a culture are going to shape the culture of that place moving forward. So you got the Dutch in New York City. We still have the mercantile values. We've got the multiculturalism. In Louisiana, you're going to have the French culture going. In the Southwest, you're going to have really what historians would argue more of a Mexican culture than it is of something recognizably Euro-American, aside from the Spanish. And so as you subdivide this, we parsed through those records and then saw an interesting gap. First of all, culturally, you have major changes around the country with the Great Migration. So there are little pockets of culture in black communities that have moved around and are disparate from these theories. And then you also have in police departments police departments that have been founded at different times than the cities themselves, right? The NYPD is founded 1845, well after New York City is founded, right? There's security for it. And so the people who shaped that department are not the Dutch. Right. They're actually the Protestant elite here, and they're shaping the rules, and they're borrowing from London.
And what was happening in Ireland?
You've got the Irish potato famine. And
One third of the population.
Yes,
died.
and right. You've got this massive exodus from Ireland. You've got folks coming here who are not able to get work, and at that point, you have policing, not what it is today, as a valorized profession, but basically a glorified security force.
Exactly.
Well,
and we add the experience that the Irish did have with the Brits.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll preface this by saying, our diagnosis isn't like all Irish are police, or and all police are Irish. Our diagnosis is, in every single community, examining where your police department came from culturally and the people who founded it and how they shaped it is going to be a unique experience, and the cultural stories that are built right there at the beginning are going to tell you a lot about the present. And I mean, that's true in Oakland, and I think that it speaks to those challenges and the immense friction between the Black Panthers and the police department in the 60s and 70s, is that you had a city that was predominantly white, and then you have the Great Migration. You've got
from the south, right?
Yeah, you've got a city that is suddenly famously black,
right?
But the police department doesn't change that fast. So you've got a police department where there's like common knowledge, there's like Klan stuff going on quite nearby. You've got a very white police department, and then you've got a black radical community that wants to police itself. Yeah, you're going to have chaos.
Matt, can you touch on that a bit? On you mentioned the Klan, the influence of neo-Nazis. I mean, hardcore Klansmen going into this work in particular areas of our country.
Yeah, and we have a chapter in there that talks about. Well, it was an odd thing for us that, and I know it had been brought up before in the culture, that you had slave patrols being sort of the driving narrative of like, oh, that's where police came from. Like 1619 Project has a little bit about that. And it's a pretty tenuous relationship to get us to the present. And actually, there's a point where we spoke with.
What was true though?
Yeah.
I mean,
well.
Blacks being on the wrong side of town.
What I'll say is that we actually ended up briefly speaking to the author of the book that is most frequently referenced for that connection from slave patrols to policing. And even she, in her own book, says, like, this is about the Carolinas, right? And that's why we explore the story that happens, which is just a fascinating American history story that I wasn't aware of beforehand, which is South Carolina. And the Carolinas are founded specifically by planters from Barbados. And Barbados was known to those colonial powers and it was known as the most awful, bizarro form of slavery and the most horrible, cruel version there was. Right, there's slavery around the world, and there are other people who are slavers being like, these people are out of control, and then they go to the Carolinas, and they're the founders of what we understand to be slavery in the United States. Right, in Virginia, it's a different story, and that changes over time, but the massive expansion of slavery comes from these nut jobs in Barbados, for the lack of a better word, who were like, yeah, we're going to start the process of importing people with the plans that they'll die within 5 years. And so, of course, they develop an incredible economic dependence on it. All that to say that as they shape the police force, there's a direct transition. It goes from slave catchers to the police in the Carolinas, and particularly in Charleston, Carolina. But across the country, to answer your question, the transition wasn't so clear in different places, right? There are some police departments that are founded after the Civil War, right? So you've got a different story going on there. But you do have a pretty clear transition in politics and in the discourse of public safety from slave catchers to the Klan, and then an intersection with police departments to varying degrees. And I think that really, to the extent academics are looking at this moving forward, like really parsing out the Klan's role in Jim Crow, in the in mass incarceration, in the institutionalization of these inequities, brings us
taking different forms in different cities.
Well, yeah, it
different
brings us
areas,
to
different
tangible
like-
stuff. In the cop, who's
Yeah.
the cop on the street? Be like, I'm a slave catcher.
Yeah, right.
What
right.
the? Fuck you. and like right when you're like, I signed up to try to do something sort of reasonable here, and that's my response. But when there's a more nuanced argument that actually you can touch a little bit, because there's still Klan stuff going on around the country.
Right. So this is a discussion that has to happen in the country and in police departments and among the higher ups, but we're not having it. That's why, again, everybody, cop, this is so important, such an important book. You also talk about the enormous difficulty of reform.
Yeah.
Okay. So touch on that. Why is it so difficult? You mentioned, I think, your friend in Colorado. You said the almost stop solitary confinement. It's almost this, almost that. We have friends we work with, Jim Gilligan and Bandy Lee, who have also given us the answer and have come close to trying to shut down solitary confinement. And yet it never happens. Or if it happens, it only happens a brief time. Then some other politician gets in office and
Lock 'em
says,
up. No.
right, and so that's, and maybe you want to bring in Dukakis's phrase here. So it's the larger political culture that is running the show, and it can easily play on people's fears to forward policies that are so counterproductive, and yet we know nothing else to do. We don't have a narrative, an alternative, and that's what I think you're trying to get at here with the 6 proposals, at least in part, right?
Well, a lot in
That
there.
was a clear-
A lot in there. So what I'll
Yeah.
say is like, as a basic framing, civilian oversight has
Right.
tremendous benefits that are not being really effectively studied right now. In
For
Oakland,
the police too.
for the police too, absolutely.
As well.
And I can give some specific examples there, but let's just look at lawsuit payouts. So,
Yeah.
so in Oakland, they had a massive decline in lawsuit payouts once they created the civilian oversight.
Taxpayers are paying that.
Yes, and we're going from 35 million to 5 or so over a
And what about
5-year
New York?
period.
We're talking
In New
hundreds of
York,
millions,
it's
right?
going way up because you don't have an accountability system where you can do anything other than just say, please, would you do that? And that's subject to everybody else's pleas and so on. But Chicago too, you're seeing really clear, tangible benefits. And what is a civil lawsuit payout? It's a calculated measure of harm, right? When you're having fewer civil lawsuit payouts, you're having less harm in the community. So that's one part of it. You've got a financial benefit to it. You've got, it costs more to have a police officer in internal affairs than it does to have somebody in civilian oversight doing the work. You have this get chipped away at various times. And I think that to answer your question on why doesn't it quite get there, I think part of it is the challenge of when we're ready to have the conversation is always right after something screwed up just happened. And so George Floyd being a great example.
And the protest movements.
Yeah.
The largest protest movements in our country still wasn't able to turn things around, or did temporarily, and then we're back. Like I was in this, stop and frisk trial,
No.
and it made a difference for a few years, but now we're back to the same.
Well, here's the problem. When you have a response, and they say in civilian oversight, it's an adage of like, there's 2 ways to start one of these entities in war times or peace times. And when you start it as a reaction to something, people want something fast. They want to
protest, right?
Yeah. So let's
And the
say
slogans-
somebody in your
yeah,
city is killed,
Right.
and the community says, we got to change this. We want results fast, which means we're drafting a city charter amendment or an ordinance amendment fast. We are not going to be able to consider every possible scenario. And on top of that, the equal and opposite response right after killing is going to be as great as it's going to be, right? You're going to have, that's when the police union is going to say,
More
no way.
defensive, exactly.
And no way. And the police chief's going to say, well, we got to wait out this trial or whatever it's going to look like. Where in Oakland, for example, where they built this accountability system that does have a lot more checks and balances, as far as I'm concerned, they did that by community members writing the ordinance and the city charter sections that they wanted before the crisis. They knew what it was, and they didn't introduce it as legislation. They said, we're going to wait because we know it's coming.
That's one of your proposals, right?
Yeah.
More civilian control.
Absolutely. And I think that
Civilianization of the now again. So let's go through this. Each of these proposals are so important, and it just beyond reform here now. So, how do you do that? How would you do that in New York City here?
well, so
Given the political environment, and given Trump's probable reaction of bringing the federal troops, but all right, leaving that alone. How would you concretely try to do that?
So while we were at the CCRB, they had a charter revision commission, and that's when you come propose changes to the city charter that then go to the voters.
Does this go through the city council or governor?
There's actually one that goes through the mayor and one that goes through the city council.
Yeah, okay.
Inevitably, the proposals that happen there are really important, get overlooked by the media. There was just a charter revision thing that just happened a couple months ago,
Right.
not in the news. But for me, I had folks calling me saying, "Hey, is something going to happen here?" Because we got policy proposals. But you need the political momentum, and you need the elected officials to be aware of that, and that's where community involvement, like paying attention to that, and making sure your electeds are aware of that and understand.
And you
that
point
that
that in
can
the
happen.
book. That's
It's
difficult
super
to do.
super critical. So
Yeah,
I'm just talking about tangibly.
Right.
Like New York is going to need two things to change. One, you're going to need, if you're going to really have a serious accountability system here, serious changes to the city charter. Enforcement of the city charter. Right now, the NYPD can blow off a records request. Let's say somebody got killed by the police, and they did. Let's say that the CCRB says, we want all the body cam, and the NYPD says, no, screw you.
That's that? There's no recourse?
It's a long walk to getting that footage, if at all. And
I
it's
see.
right, it's led to blown deadlines. There's a lot of chaos that happens in that process. And so what in Oakland, for example, they put in the city charter that if the police chief doesn't provide those records, there's automatically an ethics investigation that opens, and the police chief can be fired by
There's got to be some teeth behind it.
by the equivalent of the CCRB board, not by the mayor, right? And so that means that your oversight entity can fire the chief of police for being intransigent. And although that's only happened once in the history of the city, the constant threat that is just in play is going to mean everybody plays it a little bit more above board. And these are the incentives you're trying to change. In New York, I mean, I'm hoping whoever is the next mayor seriously looks at having a commissioner who takes accountability really seriously and is willing to show that in their chiefs that they promote on the way up. And
Of course, that remains to be seen.
that does remain to
We're
be
not
seen.
sure.
And
More women, though, right?
yeah,
That's one.
absolutely, that's
we'll get
something
to
we
the
talk
women.
about. Yeah, and you're going to need a department culture where there's a very clear message coming from City Hall, because ultimately we talk about, like, every police department in the country is going to be responsive to the political whims of the highest elected officials. And so when you had Bloomberg, everybody's doing stop and frisk because he says, well, that's what fixes crime. We're going to do the broken windows stuff. And then when you have Adams, we're going to do more anti-crime, sort of narcotics busts and guns
Street
and drugs,
crime
street
units.
crime units. And it does. So what are the constitutional violations? We'll pay out the lawsuits and we'll figure it out. If you have a mayor come in there and say, hey, heads are going to roll, and they must roll, Commissioner, if there are constitutional violations, if there are cover-ups, if there are people dying in the street, and because the credibility of the department's at stake. And I don't mean that in the sense of like the NYPD brand. I mean like you want to be able to have a sense that people trust that law enforcement is acting in good faith as the enforcers and protectors of the Constitution. And you want to be able to think that somebody will come forward as a witness because they think it's a credible action to take. And when serious stuff goes down. Sorry.
No. And the wonderful phrase you use from Jack Maple.
Yeah.
Yeah. Act as if the victim was your mother.
And it was so frustrating in 2020 having this, right? It's like, are they slave catchers or not? You have a system.
Jack Maple was
He was a deputy commissioner in the NYPD, but he was also a detective. He's a brilliant guy. Folks should check out. There's a couple podcasts about him, books about him. And he turns out to be a real hero in our story, which is surprising, right? You'd think the people who investigate police misconduct would not have cops as heroes, and it turns out that there are really amazing people with aligned visions of public safety who have just been sidelined in the story. Jack Maple died a month before 9/11, so like his story isn't quite told outside of law enforcement. You go across the country, there are like rooms named after him. There's CompStat that he's attributed to him. But at the end of the day, this is somebody who said, we need to police based on harm. And harm is going to be the story. If somebody did a serious violent crime, we're going to take that just as seriously as if it happened to that officer, to the officer who's investigating the case's own mother. And when you have that in the fabric of a police department, you're going to have totally different incentives.
And harm also entails shaming and harassment and right, those sorts of daily abuses that you would want to have done to your mother or to yourself.
Yeah, right.
And that's got to be, again, that as you say, that blue line has to disappear, because these are our neighbors, our community. They these are our fellow citizens. They're not them versus us.
And the NYPD is paying for this. And ironically, as we look through it, the entity that first was flagging these issues outside of individual officers was the PBA, the union here. They were saying these crime stats are made up. This is harming our relationship to the community. Now, were they saying it in every single venue? No. But we're looking at some of these old records from the PBA magazine and statements from Pat Lynch, going like, wait a second. Why is Bloomberg pushing with stop and frisk when even the own officers union is saying this isn't working? Exactly. There's got to be some level of responsiveness.
Yeah. Spend just a little time on this data-driven concepts that, CompStat, which at first is useful but then gets out of control. And again, taking the humanity, in a sense, out of the interaction. How does that happen with a data-driven sort of system?
Yeah, so I mean, Bloomberg came in. I'll say you have different architects. So CompStat is initially built, as in Jack Maple's words, because he would say, how many assaults happened in your precinct last week versus this week, and the person running the precinct would be like, I don't know. And so he had this sort of empty data process to be like, just be able to tell me what's going on in your precinct. We're not deriving any meaning out of the stats, but I need to know you're paying attention. And that ends up becoming a metric for success. Yeah. Well, we had 4 assaults last week, and now we have 3 assaults this week, and we're improving. Okay. And once you're looking at that as an improvement, then so the following week after you came in and said, hey, we're actually improving, and well, let's say there were 4 assaults, well, maybe you downgrade one of those assaults so that it's a misdemeanor and not a felony, and so it doesn't go on there. And then so we're dead even though the same actions actually occurred. And so you have this incentive in the department as these stats become metrics for success, even though they were not built by social scientists or experts in that arena.
The data.
And then, hey, I want a promotion, my crime's going down in my precinct. And so that gets institutionalized, and you see, I mean, they did
But the arrests still go up.
Well, yeah.
Even though the data is showing the crime. So
that's the absurdity of the situation, is that there's also this pressure that really begins with the Giuliani administration to do more arrests even when crime is going down, which, I can't speak for Giuliani's logic there, but it seems pretty absurd, where he was just like, we're just going to do more of this no matter what is going on, whether crime's going up or down, there need to be more arrests at all times. Well, then you have officers going out on the street and just doing bad arrests. Or I spoke to an unnamed individual in the NYPD universe who was talking about an officer who had he was submitting 10 stop reports in whatever his quota section was. He was making the people up. But like, what a nonsensical system with such gravity and such importance that we be accurate and fair, that there are these BS incentives built into it left and right, where you've got some people saying more arrests, more stops, the quality doesn't matter.
And the incentive should be the opposite. Reward for bringing the crime rate down.
Well, absolutely. And also,
what are you doing to do that?
Well, in the old transit, because transit used to be its own police department, right, before 1993. The transit police, they used to have an internal investigation each time you made an arrest and it didn't get prosecuted. They would check on the constitutionality, or whether it was a good arrest. The parlance is just going to be a good or bad arrest, but it is a check on the constitutionality of the arrest. No way that's happening in the NYPD right now. And you just blame the DA. Oh, the DA won't charge it. But you in a perfect world, when people are arrested, a grand jury would say, well, that's a good arrest, and we need to proceed as the people and make sure they're successfully prosecuted. One of the reasons so many cases are dropped is because it's like these aren't quality arrests happening regularly, and that's the dance we talk about in our own work as civilian oversight practitioners and in policing. It's really easy to measure quantity, right? It's a number. Quality becomes a much different exercise, and even just in the process of investigating an officer.
Humanness, yeah, the quality.
Yeah, because it's like, was it thoughtful, attentive, kind? Right. There are all these variables that you can add where it's like these metrics haven't been built into policing that well. Although when you look at like de-escalation across the country, there are de-escalation policies that are starting to have specific metrics.
You talk about that. It's helpful.
Yeah, and then as you get more specific, all you want for the cop who's just getting out on the street is to be clear on what's being asked of them. But in the NYPD, that just has not been the case. It's the ask is deal with it.
My experience is that many of the cops would appreciate having a mental health worker along with them to, as you say, lower the temperature of many of the events that they're trying to deal with. They're dealing with very emotionally, at times, emotionally distressed people.
Also, that's the likeliest time you're going to get assaulted, and you don't necessarily, they have training on how to deal with people who are suffering from some sort of emotional distress, but like it's training. It's not going to social work school, and yeah, there's just all sorts of risks that you don't need to be taking, and the outcomes are better, right? You want somebody, when somebody's having a schizophrenic meltdown in the street, you want somebody who knows really how to deal with that situation. I'm not going to pretend to, but if I was a cop, I'd have to.
Exactly. That's what Jim Gilligan talks about. It's a public health issue. Right? We're not talking so much about moralistic punishment here, which we're still stuck in, and violence directed at people who have been already victimized and so on. Now, I'm not trying to paint a Pollyannish figure here. There are some people who do bad things. We know that. But again, when you toss out, let me just throw this out at you. Cornel West's phrase, "Justice is what love looks like in public." I mean, we're pretty far from that, but isn't that...
Well, by that metric, justice isn't really rewarded in the NYPD nearly as much as it should be, right?
We got to move toward that.
Well, in the best moments...
As best we can.
The best moments you see are not going to be rewarded or punished in this structure, right? You see an officer come and diffuse a situation,
That's
and
right.
There's no arrest, and you're watching the body cam, you see it's coming, it could be coming, hey, you could do it right now. And the officer's like, no, we're going to work this out. I'm going to work this out with you, work this out with you. We all done here? Great.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. And there, I remember watching some of the stuff. It was cool. In Oakland, I could, actually, on our team, which is something that doesn't happen in New York for whatever reason, we would send to internal affairs, hey, put a note. The oversight people watched this, and it was excellent mediation, and we think this officer deserves a commendation. And we're not kissing anybody's butt. We're just like, this stuff needs to be rewarded, and it's clear nobody else is going to do it. One of the challenges, and I think one of the points of friction with oversight in New York, there's no positive stuff coming out of the CCRB story for an officer, and that's probably because it's so distant from the NYPD itself, and they got a ton of stuff to handle. But positive reinforcement needs to happen too. At least in that oversight environment, you could do two things. You could have that positive reinforcement. You'd recommend a commendation or the equivalent. And the other thing you could do is, because the agency can investigate any be involved in any internal investigation in the department, I think that it improves whistleblower protections for cops when because the parlance is going to be internal affairs is a political arm of the police department, right? Yeah. If they want you out, they'll get you out. This is not going to be a really objective
That was a forerunner,
process.
Right, historically, of the CRRB.
CCC. Yeah. So you had the internal affairs doing all the investigations. Now the CCRB jointly does some and individually does others. But the idea being, when oversight's really there, you can look at a case and you can go, this kind of looks like somebody getting sandbagged. That's a problem. That could be a political problem, or it could just not happen. And I think that that's a really interesting feature that is underexplored in oversight, because what officers, I think, really want more than random leniency is consistency.
Yes.
And
and also, as you mentioned again, one of the 6 proposals, truth and reconciliation.
Yeah.
As well as what you touch on that and the need for more police women. And maybe, I know this is about the 3rd time we've referenced our friend Dukakis here.
Yeah.
Maybe we could get into the trouble he got in for his statement, but you talk about,
Oh, you got to remind me of the statement.
well,
Which
if his wife was, what was it?
He had the weird thing with the tank.
No,
Anyway.
his wife. If your wife was raped, what would you do?
Oh,
Would you approve of capital punishment? And he said he didn't think so.
Yeah, well,
So that he wasn't being tough enough. He wasn't being ruthless. But leave that alone. No, what do you mean by the truth and reconciliation
so we look
for
at
the
it.
police force and for the community?
Yeah, so I think actually we were just talking about beforehand the Chicago police torture in the
Yes.
project that's gone on there to acknowledge that there's somebody in that department who tortured a lot of people. Tortured, like Rwanda torture. And they did a real truth and reconciliation.
Waterboarding and all the whole
Yeah, like scary stuff. Guantanamo Bay stuff is happening in the Chicago Police Department, and they went back and they created a monument to it, and had civil lawsuits. They had payouts to the families and to the descendants of the families, and had a public conversation about what occurred. I mean, it makes me sad because in Oakland, I think that's a place where, like I said, there's this palpable thing going on. We got to be talking about the harm that was done, and in New York, certainly, there's a bunch of instances where you look at look at the impact of Eric Garner, and look at what's happened to his family. It's like there are so many people who are harmed in these situations, and we don't hear from them. Having an open conversation about it is really important. So we talk about creating forums for that.
We're all harmed in some way. Obviously, the family, the victim, but there's a callousness that we begin to feel. This society really doesn't give a shit.
Well, and it's because a lot of this shit is unnecessary. And that's the key word, right? Is this necessary? And a lot of time we watch the body cam, we watch what's on the news, and we go, that wasn't necessary. What the hell are we doing here? And we're consistently and callously doing unnecessary things to people who did not deserve to be treated that way. And that's why, it's called cop breaking the fixed system, but it's fixed as in rigged to continue to perpetuate that unnecessary and callous harm. So you gotta bust it open.
So we busted open. We only have just a couple minutes more to go here. So appropriately, we've got 2 minutes now. How do we bust it open and bring about greater radical love for us all?
So right now, I would say sit for a moment with what's going on with ICE.
Yeah.
ICE, this massive law enforcement entity now, is going around, and we're developing this sort of common understanding that the giant law enforcement agency is acting outside of the boundaries of the United States Constitution. Right? And think about the consequences of that, because it could quickly happen to other law enforcement entities, which is a serious constitutional,
right.
constitution degrading moment.
Right.
So for me, there's got to be a vision for all law enforcement in this country to be held to the standard of the United States Constitution. If you want to be an ICE officer, you got to follow the Constitution. If you want to be a police officer here, you got to follow the Constitution. We have the systems in place to do that on a local level right now, where just a little more investment in our oversight entities can make a huge difference. Banking on them having some sort of disciplinary power, more leverage in the conversations about accountabilities needs to happen, because what it does is it makes the officer on the street know, if I violate the Constitution, I'm out of a job. And that's what preserves the Constitution, is that people who violate it and don't cherish it in law enforcement gotta go. So there's a future for that, and I think ICE and the federal intervention in DC gives us the opportunity to really dwell on the consequences and the ways to change things moving forward.
And you and Greg have opened up that conversation. Thank you so very, very much. I really need cop. Everybody's got to read this. I hope you're right.
Thanks so much, Jim.
I really do.
Appreciate you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all very, very much for watching us here on The Radical Imagination. We'll see you again next week.